Hey there, and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight Black Voices. I'm Angelito. Brandis Friedman has the evening off. On the show tonight, a big dip in employment for young Black Chicagoans. Local organizations share what they say works for young people and jobs. Illinois leads the country in wrongful convictions. What does that mean for Mayor Johnson's reform efforts? And what the fight for water justice looks like for Black residents and how it's portrayed in a Bronzeville art exhibit.
I was not planning to do any of this. I was just trying to teach myself photography.
And an exhibition of portraits and personalities of gay Black men in Chicago during the 1980s. All of that coming up, but our first story tonight, unemployment for Black youth is rising. Resources aimed at combating the decline right after this.
Chicago Tonight, Black Voices, is made possible in part by Fifth Third Bank and by the support of these donors.
At Fifth Third, we believe when diverse voices are heard and empowered, communities are made stronger, lives are made better, and the future holds greater promise for all. That's why we're proud to support Chicago Tonight Black Voices. Together, we can make a difference. Together, we can drive change.
Now, Chicago's newly minted mayor is looking for options to address youth unemployment. Mayor Brandon Johnson has instructed the city's budget office to find ways to fund youth unemployment and enrichment programs. And according to a new study by UIC's Great Cities Institute, those jobs are critically needed. Now, the study showed a spike in unemployment of young Black people during the pandemic. For Black people ages 20 to 24, the jobless rate rose from 44% in 2019 to 57% in 2021. And that's on top of the 87% of Black residents 16 to 19 years old who were unemployed in 2021. Now that's 20% higher than the national average. Joining us now with more are Melissa Mister, Chief of Strategy and Staff at After School Matters, Kadeem Fuller, Associate Director in Recruiting at Co-op Careers, and one of the study's authors, Matt Wilson, Associate Director for Economic and Workforce Development at UIC's Great Cities Institutes. All right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Let's get right into it. Matt, so I found that you said in your study that a rise in crime seems to happen when youth employment drops. Is there a correlation, or what are your thoughts on that?
So there's been a lot of evaluations of summer youth employment programs and very robust research designs that have tried to get towards causation. And they've found that there's, when program participants are working and they're a part of programs that provide them mentors and counseling, that crime actually drops 50%. And that's while they're engaged in that. The year after, if they're not engaged in those types of programs, there actually is no more effect of that program, so the crime doesn't actually drop. So there's, I think, a very strong correlation, but I think even we can say from these types of research designs that there actually is a cause of being and having a job and being enrolled in these types of programs and them reducing crime.
So let's talk about one of those programs, Melissa, with After School Matters. Tell us a little bit about the program and how you're really getting teens ready for employment.
For sure. So After School Matters provides programs and internship opportunities for high school teens aged 14 to 18. They're eligible from the minute they graduate from 8th grade all the way through the summer after they graduate from high school. These programs are in a variety of content areas, the arts and sports and communications and leadership and STEM, and they're really designed to help young people build skills in those content areas, but also build those transferable 21st century skills that they'll need for whatever employment they decide to go after in the future, whatever career opportunities they're interested in.
And so, Kadeem, I understand that Co-op focuses on getting Black college graduates employed. What strategies do you all use to help them find opportunities?
Yes, so Co-op Careers is a national nonprofit. We support recent college graduates who are facing underemployment as well as unemployment. A lot of people know what unemployment is, but underemployment is a little bit more difficult to talk about, right? So underemployment is basically recent college graduates who are currently employed at a job that maybe don't require a bachelor's degree, or maybe have a job that requires a bachelor's degree but make less than $50,000. So what we do at Co-op Careers is really focus in on the social capital piece as well as digital skills, right? When you think of digital skills, really upskilling students who are recent college graduates, who pretty much that defines as 10 years and off as far as the recent college graduates. They're learning our 2 curriculum programs at Co-op Careers, which is data analytics as well as digital marketing. They're learning all these skills, learning about all these different data focuses, and really trying to figure out ways in order to enter into the digital economy. We couple that with the social capital piece, right? When you think about underemployment being a systemic issue, it will require all of us to kind of work through that. So we have a cohort model. 16 students are all together in the program where they're learning all these different skills and building their social capital. So when they are ready for a job, it's not a cold email they're sending. It's someone that we're in the program that can support each other as they get better with their jobs.
Mm-hmm. Now, Matt, would you say that looking at getting young people job opportunities is a responsibility for the city or maybe the private sector?
So I think both. I think one interesting thing is to think of what the private sector's role is in employing young people. And largely, the labor market has not employed young people at the same rate as older people. Younger people just aren't as competitive when they're competing for jobs against people that are older than them. So I think it's really important for the private sector, for the public sector, to step in and train young people. If we think of a 16 and 17-year-old, they're probably not ready to contribute to the private sector without training, without knowing things. And I think the money that the state of Illinois is trying to put into youth employment is such a great step in the right direction in terms of providing young people with skills where they can sort of become engaged with an employer, know how to show up on time, know how to work with coworkers, know how to respond to supervisors. And so I think that the public sector needs to sort of give a push to people that in the labor market right now just aren't as competitive as older people.
And thinking about like public funding or public pushing, what would you like to see from the new administration in terms of how they push and advocate for programs like After School Matters, Melissa?
Sure. So we've been so encouraged by Mayor Johnson's dedication and commitment to youth employment and engagement. It aligns absolutely with After School Matters beliefs about making sure that every young person in the city has access to opportunities, high quality opportunities, to explore their interests, to decide what it is they want to do now and in the future, to thrive right now and to thrive in the future. So that we've been incredibly encouraged, and we just hope to see all of his goals come to fruition, because it will be a win for the city for sure.
Kadeem, jumping over to you, I would like to know what structural issues do you believe contribute to unemployment or underemployment for Black college graduates?
It's a really good question. I think a lot of it is that social component, right? The social capital piece, knowing how to network in a positive way, right? When I talk to a lot of young adults, people in our program, before they come into our program, the big thing that they have about networking is it feels kind of icky, right? I'm just asking for a job, don't really know what that looks like. But here at Co-op, we kind of show them that social capital or building network is not just about asking for a job. It's really being a servant leader. How can I support you in the work that you're already doing? And at Co-op, we teach everyone how to do that. And, our program works. Right now, it started in 2014 in New York. We are fairly new in Chicago, around about 2 years. So right now, we're really just trying to get the word out so students know, in terms of upskilling for the jobs as well as learning that social capital, networking piece, Co-op can support in all of that.
Matt, jumping back to you, what do you think that the city could do to help teens get ready for opportunities within the private sector?
So I think that the executive orders that Mayor Johnson has signed is a great step in the right direction. But I think it's, acknowledging that young people don't have all the skills they need to thrive in the private sector right now. So I think thinking of sort of these summer job programs and some of the year-round ones that I think are really encouraging and look like they're going to happen. I think thinking of those as an extension of education, and we think of education as only occurring in classrooms, but sort of on-the-job training and thinking, that I think the public sector can do a great service to the private sector in training young people and putting money towards preparing them for those types of jobs.
Absolutely. Melissa, jumping back to you, what do those numbers look like for participation within After School Matters? Have you seen an increase during the pandemic, a lull, or
Sure.
How has it changed?
So in a typical summer, After School Matters serves around 10,000 young people. And to your point about this is something that needs to continue throughout the year, during the school year, there are another 16 or so thousand that are in internships and programs, so that those numbers have been relatively steady. Of course, we saw small dips during the pandemic, but we transitioned things to remote, just like all of us did for work. Then I expect that this summer the demand is going to be greater, and so it's really important that we're there for young people the way we need to as we recover from the pandemic.
Absolutely. Well, I think that we are out of time. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Our thanks to Melissa Mister, Kadeem Fuller, and Matthew Wilson. And up next, Brandis Friedman and the cost of wrongful convictions in a conversation recorded earlier.
For the fifth year in a row, Chicago is the wrongful conviction capital of the United States. That's according to a new report from the National Registry of Exonerations. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now with more. And Heather, 124 people were exonerated in 2022 after being convicted in Cook County. How does that compare with the rest of the nation?
In all, 233 people were exonerated nationwide. There were 2 other exonerations in Illinois, one in Will County and one in Lake County, but no other state had more than Illinois. Michigan had 16 exonerations and Texas had 11. No other state reached double digits.
Okay, so the vast majority of those exonerations were tied to misconduct by 2 former Chicago police officers, Sergeant Ronald Watts and Detective Ronaldo Guevara. What are they accused of doing?
Well, Ronald Watts, for more than a decade, policed the IDB Wells housing project, and he is accused and was convicted of corruption in basically extorting visitors and residents of the housing project. Detective Guevara was a judge found routinely lied under oath and is accused of framing suspects.
In 2022, Chicago taxpayers spent at least $98 million to settle lawsuits alleging misconduct by Chicago police officers. What do these exonerations cost the city?
Conservatively, tens of millions of dollars, although we won't know for many years. In September 2021, 2 men who were convicted based on evidence developed by Detective Guevara were each paid $10.5 million by the city after spending 23 years in prison for a crime they were later exonerated of. This is a massive drain on the city's finances.
Not to mention, finances, but also trust in the Chicago Police Department. And this is no doubt bad news for brand new mayor Brandon Johnson. He's vowed to reform the police department and to stop spending millions to settle lawsuits alleging misconduct by officers. What does Chicago's status as the wrongful conviction capital of the country tell us about the challenges that he faces?
They're just enormous. So whoever is the next top cop is going to have to address these reform questions. For at least the next 4 years, the city will remain under a court order requiring it how it polices specifically Black and Latino Chicagoans. I should note that all but one of the people exonerated in 22 were either Black or Latino. That consent decree was based on a 2017 Department of Justice report that found that Black and Latino Chicagoans routinely had their constitutional rights violated. That's going to be job number 1 for Mayor Johnson and whoever the next police superintendent is.
Okay, not a small task at hand. Heather Sharon, thank you so much.
Thanks, Brandis.
And you can read Heather's full story on our website. That's WTTW.com/news. Back with more Chicago Tonight Black Voices right after this.
A local artist is hoping to educate the public on what they can do in the water fight for justice in a new exhibit titled Wishing Well. Now, this is a 2022 Guardian analysis finds that majority of Black and Latino neighborhoods have the highest concentration of lead in their tap water. And as of a few months ago, the city of Chicago has replaced less than 300 lead service lines out of about 390,000. Joining us now with more on this exhibit and water injustice are environmental artist, storyteller, and the curator behind the exhibit Wishing Well, Micaiah Jameson, and Ayanna Simba, the city programs director at the Illinois Environmental Council. Thank you, ladies, so much for joining us. Micaiah, let's get right into it. Now, Wishing Well is meant to be both an educational and interactive exhibit. Why was it important for you to raise awareness on this relationship that Black people have with water?
I think it's important because in the wake of a climate crisis, our access to water is going to be even more precarious than it already is. We do live on the Great Lakes, but as the climate crisis worsens, there's going to be an influx of people in the next maybe 5 to 10 years, I would say. And it's important for us to reclaim our relationship with water because it's important for us to harmonize and reclaim our relationship in our ecosystem. So much of our climate crisis is a result of us being in incorrect relationship with our ecosystem. So for me, it's important for us to have a full picture of what our Earth looks like so that we can envision what justice looks like and what a greater Earth looks like.
Ayanna, jumping over to you, what would you say are the biggest threats in Chicagoans' water, specifically in predominantly Black communities?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a couple of things. I think one, people not being able to afford their water, right? We know that water rates have increased by 80% in the last decade or so. And so that ends up showing as water shutoffs. Thankfully, the city does have a moratorium on water shutoffs, but people can still have liens placed on their homes when they have a lot of water debt. And also in 2021, Elevate study found that the Chicagoans had accumulated $421 million in water debt. Sorry, it's a little bit of neighborhood sound. $421 million in water debt, and 60% of that was concentrated in Black communities. At the same time, we also have a ton of lead service lines across the city. As you mentioned before, roughly 400,000. And those tend to show up at single family and two-flat homes. A lot of Black historical communities like Inglewood, South Chicago, Austin have a lot of those homes. And so they're the most subject to having lead in their water. And lead is a neurotoxin. It has a bunch of terrible impacts. It's leading to learning disabilities, violent behavior, and in adults, kidney disease, and issues with our reproductive systems as well. So these are things that are directly impacting the Black community where we experience, community violence. We're dealing with mental health issues. We're dealing with educational attainment, and a lot of that can be tied back to lead in drinking water.
Now, Micaiah, you said that it's important that Black people reclaim and recoup their relationship with water. Explain that.
I think that oftentimes when we talk about water as Black people, it's often the conversation is, I can't get my hair wet or I can't swim. And there is an institutional injustices that tie to why we even think that way. And in order for us to have freedom and liberation and joy, we have to have a good relationship with our natural environment. And water is who we are. Water is 90% of the earth. Water is 70% of our bodies. So how can we have freedom and liberation and move forward in life if we are not able to acknowledge the injustice and also find the power and agency in creating a greater narrative, pushing the conversation forward and past what we've been conditioned to believe about ourselves and our relationship with water.
Yeah. Ayanna, jumping back to you. Now, we know that Chicago is a little bit behind when it comes to replacing the lead water service lines. What are the consequences of these delays?
I mean, as I mentioned before, right, like lead is a neurotoxin that has a ton of impact on our public health. But we also know that lead service line replacement is not getting cheaper. It's already estimated to cost between $5 to $8 billion across the city. At an individual level, it can cost as much as $37,000 to replace a lead service line. So it's the cost of it is not going to get cheaper. The public health impacts are going to get more expensive. We can't afford to not deal with replacing lead service lines. And we know that is the only true foolproof way to remove lead from our drinking water.
Now, Micaiah, under Mayor Johnson's administration, are you hopeful that he can get more accomplished in terms of clean water accessibility for Black and brown communities in Chicago?
I am. I'm hopeful in his ability to listen to environmental justice activists and advocates that have been doing this work for years, such as SOUL, the Southside Organization for Unity and Liberation. They're working on a Water for All program. They've been working on it since 2017, and I think that the foundation is there for water reclamation and greater water infrastructure to happen. He just has to listen to them.
And closing out with you, Ayanna, I would love to hear your thoughts as well on the Johnson administration's plans for kind of creating more clean water accessibility for Black and Brown communities. What does that look like realistically?
I mean, I'm cautiously optimistic, right? But I think the commitments that he's made so far are the ideal that environmentalists would want to see, right? Making sure that we're speeding up lead service line replacement, making sure it's actually affordable for Chicagoans, dealing with flooding and stormwater issues, and taking those things like the Water for All program and putting that into fruition so that people can actually afford their water on a day-to-day basis, and the water that they can't afford is actually safe and drinkable.
Yes. And Micaiah, one more question for you. I understand that you have a community event centered around your exhibition coming up. Tell us about that.
Yes, so actually tonight, well, on Friday, we have a meetup with Black Girl Environmentalists, which is a great group that brings Black women and femmes together over the environment. We also have a film screening called Who's Water, directed by Kate Levy, and it covers our what water injustice looks like and feels like with directly impacted people at the forefront of the storytelling. So that's happening on Sunday from 7 to 9.
Perfect. Yeah. And we've got all of those details on our website, so that'll be great for our audience to go see. Well, our thanks to Micaiah Jameson and Ayanna Simba. Now, the Wishing Well exhibit runs through May 25th at the Fortune House Center in Bronzeville. And up next, an evocative portrait of Black gay men in Chicago during the 1980s. Stay with us for a look. Chicago native Patrick McCoy worked as an environmental scientist for the EPA for decades, and in his free time, he documented the environment around him, taking pictures every day during much of the 1980s. Now, a new exhibition of his photographs offers a reminiscent look at gay Black men in Chicago during that pivotal decade, and a window into a community that's been often overlooked and stereotyped. Nick Blumberg has the story.
Patrick McCoy grew up around pictures. His father was a painter and a photographer, but Patrick...
I didn't really want to become a photographer and work with all of the little dials and so forth.
Still, he liked taking pictures, working with a simple point and shoot through the 60s and 70s.
And one day, one of my friends who worked at Helix camera store, he said, you need to step up.
McCoy got a good 35mm camera. He didn't want to take classes, so he made a deal with himself.
To carry the camera with me every day, and every day I was going to take at least one photograph.
McCoy carried the camera around his neck everywhere, biking from his home in South Shore to his job in the Loop.
When I would go through all the different neighborhoods, invariably somebody would holler out to me, hey, take my picture.
Oh, and that was part of McCoy's deal with himself too, that he'd take a picture of anyone who asked. At night, he'd develop them and carry them in his backpack the next day.
I would see some of those same people, and I would just give them their photograph. And it was like they were blown away.
McCoy got to know people, often taking their picture multiple times. Many of them were regulars at the Rialto Tap in the South Loop.
We used to call it the Star Wars bar because it had that look where there's all these kind of crazy people in there.
Everyone from people living in homeless shelters to downtown businessmen to drag queens. The crowd was mostly gay Black men.
For the Black people in the South Loop, it was kind of like Cheers.
McCoy never posed his subjects, allowing their personality to shine through.
The beauty of Black men that is beyond the prejudices and the stereotypes that have been promoted over the last 100+ years.
It's a slice of Black American male life that we don't see in art. You don't typically see them in museums.
Artist Juarez Hawkins curated the show. She's known McCoy for decades and helped him whittle down some 1,500 snaps to the 50 or so now featured. Themes started to emerge.
The guys on the bikes, the idea of Black men at leisure, definitely the hair and the fashion, because that through the 80s was really just nothing short of spectacular.
But as the 80s gave way to the 90s, McCoy felt less safe carrying his camera everywhere. Crack came into Chicago, and AIDS was taking a heavy toll.
There are people here in this little small selection of my photographs that were really dear to me, and they they succumb to the disease.
McCoy says seeing his photographs displayed like this comes with nostalgia and sadness, but also a sense of pride in what his work captures.
Seeing such beautiful imagery of that time period from a Black perspective, it's just beautiful to me.
For Chicago Tonight Black Voices, I'm Nick Blumberg.
Take My Picture is at the Wrightwood 659 Gallery in Lincoln Park through July 15th. And you can see artist Patrick McCoy and a panel of his fellow Rialto Tap regulars in conversation at the gallery on June 3rd. And that's our show tonight. Be sure to check out our website, WTTW.com/news, for the very latest from WTTW News. And if you're watching us on Friday night, know that you can also catch Black Voices and Latino Voices on Saturdays beginning at 6 p.m. And don't forget to join Chicago Tonight reporter Joanna Hernandez this Monday, May 22nd, for our next Latino Voices community conversation. She'll be joined by community leaders to explore what being a sanctuary city for immigrants really means as thousands of new arrivals are bused to Chicago amid an ongoing border crisis. Now to RSVP, visit WTTW.com/events. Now for all of us here at Chicago Tonight Black Voices, I'm Angelito. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a Chicago personal injury and wrongful death firm that is proud to recognize its 18 attorneys selected for the 2023 Super Lawyers List.